Okay, over to Isabel.
Thank you. Moment to just release. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I'm a bit of a stand-in, so I hope I don't let Kate down. Kate's supposed to be here today, and sadly can't be here, so I'm a bit of a stand-in for her. I'm very pleased to be invited here to speak to you today about how nutrition and nutritional management can be at the heart of horse well-being, and particularly in our riding stalls. Just to give us a background on myself, some of you may know me, some of you may have met me before. I have been around in the industry for an awful long time, over 20 years, working for Spillers or Mars Horse Care as a nutrition specialist. So I visit yards, riding schools, to provide advice, practical nutrition advice, but also manage the team that cover the whole country. So what I'm going to cover in my short presentation, when we were given the brief, it's huge. You know, I could have talked about this for a whole day. So I've really tried to keep it down to some key messages which practically you can take away with you. So we're going to cover forage, importance of sugar and starch. It's a subject that comes up so much. Monitoring weight and body condition, something I'm asked to do all the time, and something that you guys do without even thinking about it. Weight management, that's both good doers and poor doers. Enrichment and positive behaviour, it's something that more and more we're talking about every single day. And then some take-home tips. This seems kind of a given, water, really important. But yeah, it is probably the most overlooked component of a horse's diet. And the reason I say that is because sudden changes can make a massive difference to a horse's water intake. Simply box resting, turnout, automatic waterers, dirty bucket, going to a show or not to a show, all of those things can affect the amount of water that horse might take in. And that can be really, if they're taking less water, detrimental to their health. And we often don't measure it. The reason I talk about automatic waterers is because they're obviously a labour saving, they're a time saving, but there are some horses that just don't like to drink from an automatic waterer. And it may not be so, you know, we certainly see them in professional yards, I've seen them in riding stalls. But again, especially if you get a new horse in, you're going to need to put a bucket in there at the same time. You're going to need to train them to adapt. It sounds really obvious, but it's often the last thing that's thought about. If we aren't sure, as I've just mentioned all of this, use buckets to monitor. Feeding a mash is something that's becoming more and more common today. It has its place, particularly when we start talking about older horses, because it can support hydration and it can also encourage drinking. Now, historically, we would have thought of, oh, adding a wet feed is going to mean they don't drink as much. But actually, the science is showing that if we add a wet feed in and mash in, it will actually encourage drinking. It will encourage the horse to drink. So if you have got a horse, particularly those older horses, maybe we're thinking about things like Cushing's, adding a mash to part of their daily diet can be useful to encourage drinking. The one, I haven't, again, there's so much to cover on here, but I'm just going to mention this on mashes because as we head towards the winter, the one thing I will say is that as horses age, their teeth become more sensitive. And so actually, if that mash is really cold, if we've made it up the night before and it's really cold, that might put them off eating it and therefore drinking. So it's just something to consider when we're thinking about older horses and feeding wet feeds. So of course, forage is the foundation of every horse's diet. I said adult horses here, obviously, because of the old foundation would be milk. But the moment they start eating their own feeds, it's the foundation of every horse's diet. And it's essential to maintain digestive health. There's a welfare element that it fulfills their need to chew, and it supports their gastric health and of course their mental well-being, that need to chew. The thing that everybody forgets is forage provides a significant source of energy. I'm going to refer to energy, it's the proper word, but obviously energy and calories are the same thing. So when we're talking about energy, we're talking about calories. So when we are thinking about our forage, it's about choosing the right forage. And I put this table up. Can you all see it, or is my laptop in the way? That's slightly in the way, isn't it? It's not weird. Is that better? Yeah. When we talk about forage, very often people believe that haylage is higher in energy than hay. Well, actually, you can see from this table, maybe by one megajoule, but actually on a dry matter basis, so kilo for kilo on a dry matter basis, there's very little difference between hay and haylage. So your choice of your forage is going to be based on your management, your situation, your site, but also on the horse. Really interesting to hear in the last presentation about individuals and how we should be looking at our horses as individuals, because the same comes for choosing the right forage. We obviously have to do something that's practical on the yard, but don't think I can't feed haylage because it's going to be higher in energy. Don't think I can't feed hay because it's going to be lower. Think, what does that horse need, and choose my forage as appropriate to their needs. The same comes with straw. We are faced with a growing population of overweight horses, of obese horses. Equally, there are underweight horses, but we are faced with a population of overweight horses. So it's really important that in your establishments, you're encouraging the new horse owners of today to understand what good conditioned horse is, but how can we manage them in a ways that they're not doing as much work when they go and buy their own horse and as they might do in a riding school, or situations such as that. And straw and hay replacements can be really useful sources of forage with fibre to support where maybe the hay and haylage isn't going to work. That might be that it's too high in calories. It might be that we have a hay or haylage shortage, as you know, is being talked about today. The next subject is sugar and starch, and this is something that's got a lot of publicity in humans, but also in horses, and we'll so often get phone calls on the care line, faced on yards, oh, my horse is allergic to sugar, or I can't feed sugar. All of that is because there's so much confusion. When we are looking at sugar, we're mainly concerned about what we call WSC, so that's water-soluble carbohydrates. Now, there's fructose is a word that got thrown around a lot, probably 5-6 years ago. We were looking at grass. Fructose are the storage form of sugar in the grass. Water-soluble carbohydrates are your simple sugars and fructose. So if we're looking at feed and forages, because that's where most of the sugar will come from, we're looking at WSC. NSC is non-structural carbohydrates. Now that's looking at starch and sugar. So if you were looking at a compound feed, a competition mix, a horse and pony cube, you might look at NSC, but it's going to be a much lower level in the total diet than WSC. Grass can be as high as 35% water-soluble carbohydrate, 15% simple sugars. So 35% WSC, we'll look at this a bit later on, but if I was to tell you that a horse and pony cubes would be around, we look at NSC, but WSC in a horse and pony cube would probably be around 10%. What's coming from our grass and our forage is substantial. Even on poor pastures, some horses can be consuming far more sugar and therefore calories as well than they require. Of course, we know about laminitis, Cushing's, even gastric ulcers, where we do need to be careful about high sugar and starch. Feed in the bucket is the biggest source of starch, so that's the thing to remember. Forage is the biggest source of sugar. I love this slide because it just puts it into context for you. I don't really need to talk you through it, but the amount of sugar and starch provided by any feed, forage or the bucket, will depend on how much is eaten. If you have a balancer and it's 5% sugar and you only feed 250 grams, they're only going to get 12 grams of sugar, 12.5. If you've got 6 kilo hay that's 15% sugar, they're going to get 900 grams of sugar from it. And then you've got happy there just to show you a hay replacer. It's, again, horse owners, professionals get very concerned about the percentage of the product that they're looking at, or whether that be the forage or the commercial product. It's actually about how much is fed and of course eaten. So often I'm asked, how much haylage should I be feeding? The terminology has actually changed on this. I'm from the days, I've been around a long while, that we talk about ad libitum. And actually, from the European conventions, they decided that wasn't the right way for us to be talking about forage anymore, because we should be mindful of waste. So we at Spillers changed our terminology, and we talk about ideally as much as your horse or pony will eat, while being mindful of excess weight, should they waste. But the minimum is 2% of body weight per day on a dry matter base for maintenance. If they're overweight, it might be slightly less. If they are underweight, we can feed more. What does that actually mean? What does 2% on a dry matter basis mean? This is why it's really tricky, because if you don't know the dry matter of your forage, particularly when you start feeding haylage, you can end up underfeeding the forage that you're giving. So this slide just gives you some context of our classic 500 kilo horse, which we always use when we're talking about exhibition. No grazing. As soon as you add grazing, these numbers are getting thrown out and are very, very difficult to calculate accurately. But if we assume no grazing, the minimum for that 500 kilo horse would be 9 kilos if fed dry hay. If we're soaking it, and we'll talk about soaking in a minute, there are various reasons for soaking it, we actually have to increase the amount we feed, because soaking it will add more water and take out, obviously, some nutrients, but also some fibre. If it's haylage, we have to feed more, because we've got more water in that haylage. There are varying different types of haylage around these days, and it can be, unless you have an analysis done, it might be a 75% dry matter haylage, it might be a 50% dry matter. The difference can be huge, but as long as you remember you do need to feed more haylage than you would do hay, the calculations, different feed companies can help you with that. So, talking about weight management, of course, the starting point is monitoring body weight and condition. Obviously, there are portable scales that lots of feed companies take out in their car to help weigh your horses. But what I want to get across today about weigh scales is that it's just that weight on the day. It might give you a good indication when it comes to worming, travelling, and things like that. But from a feed management point of view, a horse's body weight can change 10 to 30 kilos a day, depending what it does on that day. Endurance horses, we've shown, going out and doing some canter work over a longer period of time, can easily drop 30 kilos just from the hydration, just from their gut fill and water. So, yes, the weighing scales can be really useful, but you've got to use them in context to other methods, such as body condition scoring. So body condition scoring is the best method of establishing whether the horse is underweight, overweight, or the correct weight. We use, most feed companies now use a 1 to 9 scale. And I know in the equine welfare code, we still talk about the 1 to 5. The reason that we use the 1 to 9 is it has actually been proven to more closely correlate with fat deposition than the 1 to 5. And I actually think, from somebody who's done this for a long time, it's actually easier to train somebody to use the 1 to 9, because it's just about hands-on, and it can be done every single day when those horses are being brushed. Have a feel of across their neck, have a feel around their withers, behind the shoulder, across the ribs. Get to know what fat feels like and how much fat is ideal and how much is too much. Therefore, whether you want and whether or not you give it a score thereafter, yes, for paperwork and for monitoring, that's going to be useful, but really get to know what it feels like for that individual horse. I've put some links there. Those are all available on websites, on the Spillers website. Body condition indexing is a new tool that we brought out. We did some research on to try and have a bit more of an objective, because of course body condition scoring is subjective. It's about individual people putting their hands on and what they can feel. The body condition index was about trying to give a bit more objectivity to this. And it's had some really good success in terms of research and correlating with body condition score. The problem with it is it's a little bit more complicated. And so for me, the buy-in from horse owners has been, and from businesses, being more tricky. But if you want some specific measurements, the body condition scoring index basically allows you to measure different parts of their body, put it into an equation, and it gives you out a number, which again will correlate to their body condition score. Weight taping, that's something that's readily available, is really useful. Key guidance when it comes to a weight tape is the same time of day, the same person, and make sure you're using it the same weight tape, which sounds obvious, but sometimes you go into a yard and there are about 5 different weight tapes, and they will all be slightly different. So same weight tape, same time of day, same person, and make sure they're being used consistently. So when we're talking about the good doers, what we want to do is reduce the calorie density of the forage rather than the amount. So we want to consider grazing, how much grass, and ideally look for soaking hay replacement before we would decrease the amount of forage we give horses. As I said, we can use straw as a useful way of diluting the calorie content of the forage ration. There are some watch outs, dental hygiene, dental issues, good hygienic quality, but which straw, it doesn't matter as long as it's clean. A guide is 30 to 50% of the hay ration can be replaced with straw. We wouldn't want to go above 50%. Grass intake, I'm going to skip through because we've only got 5 minutes left. Needless to say, it can be really difficult to measure how much a horse is actually consuming, and even on very poor pasture, horses can consume a lot more than we could ever consider. So there are different methods there to restrict grass. So I just wanted to touch on hay soaking. It is useful for reducing WSC, but it is very variable. So you can't guarantee that that's going to make your hay suitable for a known laminate tip. That's where forage analysis might come in. The guidelines can vary from the research that we've done, 6 to 12 hours in cold weather, so this is below 60, 1 to 3 hours in warm weather, and that's because of the fermentation that occurs in the water. Steaming, so soaking versus steaming. Steaming doesn't reduce WSC. It's not effective at reducing the sugar, but it is a far superior option for improving hygienic quality. So if you have got concerns about the quality of your forage, steaming is very useful. The real watch out here is that homemade steamers are not. They don't get hot enough to kill all the microbial contamination. So it's really important that we use commercial steamers that reach the sort of the quality that we need. Gold standard, if you have a laminate, would be to soak and then steam. I'll leave it on that because that's quite challenging. I'm going to skip over this slide because I just want to get to poor doers. But just to say, balanced diets are really important. Grass and forage, particularly when we sow kits, are not going to provide balanced diets for horses. Vitamins, minerals, quality protein, lysine, the key word there. That's the thing that's lacking in forage and really important for our top line and our horses. They'll need to be supplemented. With those that have lost weight, we really want to identify the cause because it will, again, going back to individual components, it will depend on them. Are they getting enough calories? Are they eating enough forage? Have they got poor teeth? That's where you really need to be working with your vet to understand that individual horse and why that weight loss may have occurred. I've said this earlier, calories versus energy. We can get calories in without making the horse excitable. So what we need to do is look for our feeds, know how many calories are in it. There's information for whatever feed company you're using, they should have the information of the calorie content on their websites. What you want to do, we're going to see this from here, but you want to make sure that you look for a table, wherever it might be, that says digestible energy, and that's going to tell you your calorie content. So know the content, calorie content of the feed you're using. If you've got an excitable horse where you're concerned about temperament, oil can be really, really useful as a way of getting calories in without using traditional starch-based feeds. So if we want weight gain without excitability, let's use fibre and oil. Let's keep our sugar and starch levels low. Know your scoop size. Sounds really obvious, but you would not believe how many times somebody will say to me, I'm feeding a scoop. And I say, well, what does that mean? And it turns out they mean a balanced cup, or they mean a saucepan, or it can be any other apparatus that they want to measure the food out of. Really know what the weight of the feed in your scoop, and therefore you can work out the calories equivalent to that. Other common challenges, which I did not have time to cover today, but that come into what we're talking about here in terms of good nutrition and nutritional management. We've obviously got gastric ulcers, laminitis, colic, PPID, equine metabolic syndrome, and stereotypical behaviours. When we're changing the way in which our horses are living, all of these things and the way in which they're eating can have an impact. I didn't want to leave this presentation without talking about enrichment and promoting positive behaviour, because it's something that we talk about every single time we're providing a nutritional consultation. We've talked about our limited supply of forage, but being mindful of waste. Not always possible in our good doers. So reduce the calorie density of forage before the amount. All horses are individuals. I thought I'd put that in last minute and I didn't. Turnout time is appropriate. So often I hear people say, oh, but they have to be out in the field 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day. If that horse doesn't like that, bring it into the stable. Equally, if that horse doesn't like being in the stable, try and get the turnout as much as possible. It doesn't have to be a field, it can be a turnout pen. Some of the best yards I've seen have got lovely, nice turnout pens attached to a stable with a stable door so the horse can choose what they want to do. Remember that what's right for that horse is going to be different for the horse next door. Find ways to extend eating time, be imaginative. We do a lot of work at Spillers with Red Wings, and they are very good because they have very good doers generally. They're really, really good at being imaginative about how they can extend eating time. There's obviously a lot of these hay balls and very expensive things you can buy that you can put hay in or pews in, but they've made things out of old Wellington boots to try and extend this time the horse takes to eat. We can be really imaginative. It doesn't have to be costly. Herd dynamics are really important. From a feeding point of view, we want to look out for any changes, signs in bullying. Sounds really obvious, but those things will have an impact on that horse's nutrition. Older horses can really lose out when it comes to herd dynamics. They can get pushed to the bottom of the pile. That can happen really subtly when it comes to feed, forage, water, and even shelter. So we need to think about water. Let's again go back to where we first started and consider those older horses. If a horse loses weight, especially if they're getting older, the first thing to do is really monitor their forage intake, because again, going back to what I said earlier, that's where calories are coming from. So if they're losing weight, it's very likely that they're not eating as much forage as they once did, and there'll be reasons behind that. So you have to consider feeding them separately if necessary. So it was a real whistle-stop tour. I'm probably a bit over now, but some take-home tips. Don't forget the importance of water. Forage is the foundation of the diet. Enrichment and extending eating time when turnout is limited, because again, sometimes that happens for us. Not all forage is equal. Most of the horse's calorie intake will come from forage. The amount of sugar and starch provided by any feed will depend on how much is eaten. Monitor body weight and condition in a consistent way, whichever way is appropriate for your business. Reduce calorie intake and calorie density before restricting. Know what's in your feed. Identify the cause of weight loss. Use fibre and oil for weight gain without excitability. Horses are individuals, just like people. So what works for one may not work for another. Consider enrichment and extending eating time. Be imaginative. A healthy horse will be a happier horse. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, but you sort of said that haylage was good. Well, that depends on the kind of haylage is up. We have an awful lot of haylage in this week, and if it's going, say, to a thoroughbred stud, it's cut weeks before. If you're sending it to your local rider school, because they want old stuff, which is a bit exciting.
So I wouldn't say it's not as good, but on the analysis that we, so you're absolutely right, depending when it's cut, will depend on what nutrition you get from it. But on a dry matter basis, and that's where you saw that range on the table, on the dry matter basis, from all the forages that we analyse, even across racing yard forages, that range still sits there with hays and with cages. So it's about knowing your forage. It would be really interesting, and I throw this back to somebody that makes their own forage. There is a push on the continent in Europe. Every forage sold has to come with an analysis, so that a horse owner knows what they're buying. Because we spend so much time looking at our analysis of our feeds, which make up something less than 30% of their total ration, whereas we actually have no idea of that analysis of the forage that's going into them. Now, as a horse owner myself, I'm not sure that that's ever going to be possible in the scenario that we're in yet, because it would add cost to our forage, and our forage is very costly as it stands. But it would be really good to know where we're starting from, and that has to be from analysis of the forage, whether that be haylage or hay.
Cool. Any last questions? Isabel, thank you very much.
Thank you.